Hey, okay. So, today we're going to talk about the research methods. Initially, I talked about having editing as part of this, but when I started putting the editing stuff in here, I realized A, we probably don't need it that early, and B, it would make this presentation like 3 times as long. So we're just going to leave it for next week or the week after. Um, so today we're in terms of creating the evidence packets, we're going to just talk about 3 things for research. One is the goal of our research. The goal of our research for creating the evidence packet is a little bit different than what we would do to like write a paper or even create like a traditional debate file. So we're just going to make sure we're all on the same page to start off with the goals. Second, we're going to talk about some researching methods that are going to save you a lot of time and help you find research way easier and quicker and higher quality. And then third, we're going to talk about what kind of outcomes to expect as we move through different stages of the research process, right? So once again, we're going to use a little metaphor to start off here, right? I don't want you to come into this project just thinking that you're looking up a bunch of random cards and trying to like smash them together to create something that seems like an evidence packet. That's not really what we're doing here, right? What we're doing is a lot more similar to like architecture or sculpting. So your job as part of this process is to sort of like go mine the materials, like go find the research, go look over everything and figure out like what actually fits into the vision that we have as part of this packet, right? So if we're saying should be accessible, balanced, rigorous, whatever, it's your job to go find the materials that fit that vision, right? And then much like a sculptor works the stone into the vision that they have of their art, you're doing the same thing with the materials that you've mined, right? It's your job to sort of sculpt those materials into an overall packet that has structure and rigor and accessibility and all that good stuff. So your nearest comparison for this job is actually probably something more like an architect or a sculptor, right? So that's how you should think of yourself, is you're going to create something that fits your vision based on the materials that you are able to get. Okay, so let's talk about goals of research for the evidence packet. So I want to suggest to you that there's more or less 3 phases of how this research works. Phase one is just broad research for understanding, and these move more or less chronologically. So you'll start with phase one, then phase two, then phase three, right? So phase one is just broad research for understanding. You'll be going to google.com or whatever your preferred search engine is, and just using general terms. So for David's project, he might punch in something like Amazon rainforest, size, area, problems, controversies, something like that, just to get started and sort of figure out like what are people writing about this thing, right? And then as you learn pieces through that general research, you can sort of follow them up and get more in depth on them. So we could say something like, okay, Brazil is in charge of like 70% of the Amazon. So they're the most important. So what are their ecological policies, right? What groups in Brazil are causing problems in the Amazon? Is that true for other states or is it limited to just Brazil? Well, as you do the research, you'll get into those smaller questions that are nonetheless relevant to the larger idea, right? Um, at this point in the research phase, what I want you to do is create a Google Doc and sort of just take note of everything that's relevant that you learn, right? So like key terms, organizations, authors. I would imagine that there's some sort of like organization for the preservation of the Amazon rainforest, right? Something like that. I bet they produce a bunch of articles or, have a news feed or cite scientific sources that would all be helpful in doing research, right? So doing general research to sort of figure out who are the key players, what are the key arguments, where is this debate at right now? Once you get that, you get a, I mean, I think in terms of sheer volume, you probably have to read about 100 articles for this phase of the research. They don't have to be like in-depth Google Scholar articles. They could just be, local newspapers, websites, whatever, comments from the UN Secretary General, whatever. Um, but you have to read enough where you have a pretty broad perspective on what is actually going on here and who the main players are and who's in contention with who about what ought to be happening here. Once you get that, you can pretty much choose 3 or 4 subtopics that you feel like cover the majority of the debate. So you want to choose things that are pretty distinct from each other. If you choose two things that are very similar to each other, as you try to do research, it's going to be really hard to separate them in the actual file itself, right? So try to choose 3 or 4 subtopics that seem pretty differentiated from each other. And as we work together over the next 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks in this phase, I will be advising you on which subtopics to create, which will, I think, make it a lot easier. So the second phase then is research into subtopics and subcategories. So based on those 3 or 4 areas you chose, you're going to start moving into more academic sources. So my suggestion is to use a combination of Google Scholar and regular Google. Google Scholar can help fill out some of the denser parts of the research. So if you're choosing a subtopic in your topic and you've mostly read general articles, you probably want to follow up on Google Scholar and find some of the more recent heavy articles that can really tell you like what is actually going on today and what are the actual academic arguments around this. For this part of the research, you basically just want to mine as much material as possible. So when we talk about the metaphor of sculpting, this is the area where you just get as many cards as possible into your 3 subcategories for both the pro and the con or the af and the neg side. That way, as we get into the decision-making phase, like where we thought we might have been going initially may not be where we end up, right? So we want to have more options of evidence to choose. If we have like 40 cards for a subtopic, that gives us a lot more choices to choose different pieces of evidence that make different arguments and also find areas of alignment in balance. Like we talked about in the previous training, not all subtopics are created equally, right? The af is just stronger than the neg or the neg is just stronger than the af, right? So sometimes you don't choose your best cards for the evidence packet, you choose the most balanced cards on both sides. So the more cards you have, the more options you have, which makes this better. The third phase is just research to fill gaps. So like I talked about, as we get into that second phase where we research the subtopics, you might find that you're just like, dang, I wish I had this one card that said this thing. If I just had this card, I could unlock this whole subtopic, right? Like, why isn't anyone writing a neg argument that says a federal job guarantee will not solve climate change? I just need this one card. Okay. You're gonna get into this phase, and based on how much work you've done in the last 2 phases, hopefully there won't be very many cards that you need to find in this last phase, but it happens, right? Sometimes you gotta just go zero in and find that one card. This is where if you've done the other 2 phases well, you should have a bunch of authors who have probably talked about something like this, and you should have the keywords to be able to find this. So using the research methods we're going to talk about later in this presentation, you should be able to like precisely pinpoint what you're looking for in this card, and you should have the language and skills to go find it if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then we got to go back to the drawing board, right? Which sucks, but trust me, that happens. So for this phase, we're pretty much exclusively going to use Google Scholar. Google Scholar is going to have a bunch of niche articles that are really specific to a particular thing. If the card we're looking for isn't covered in the academic discourse anywhere, then we've probably taken a wrong turn somewhere, right? We're looking for something that's not really core to the controversy. And, sometimes that's okay. Like we can make it work. I'm not saying the academic discourse is the end all be all of what's correct on research, but if there's something we want to include in here that's not part of the academic discourse, we have to have a really good reason for doing that, right? Okay, so phase 1, yeah, David.
I just have one question. And this is coming from a uh, debater perspective. sometimes we think certain cards would allow us to win the round, but when we are in the round, we see that they are not as strong as we thought that they were. In when we are putting together the packet, will were there wait, how is it? Will there be a phase where we are able to use the cards in that debate round so we get a better perspective of how well the packet is
Hmm.
put together?
That's a great question. So I will say, so for example, we're running our summer camp at Augsburg right now, right? And for the middle schoolers, we gave them basically the evidence they'll have next year for middle school to sort of test it out and see, is there any inconsistency or lack of balance or whatever. Um, that's a good opportunity since we got done so early to test it in that way. For Debate en Español, EA, and financial literacy, we don't have any camp folks who are doing anything like that, so there's not the same opportunity to road test it. Um, so probably not. We'll kind of have to just vibe it out and make sure we've got everything aligned. And it's not as hard as it seems like it could be, as long as we're using the methods we talked about last time about like, are these arguments mirroring each other? Are they roughly the same strength? Claim data warrant like that, that'll get us within close enough to figure out if they're balanced or not, right? But yeah, there's no good way to do it usually. So you kind of gotta just trust you did the process right. Um, okay, so phase one, broad research for understanding. Um, I know a lot of what you're taught in high school and college is about using the right sources and being really precise right off the bat, usually, or at least that's what I was taught. I don't necessarily think that that's true, especially for looking for evidence packet debate articles and background knowledge. We kind of want to just be tapped into like what the controversy is on these topics and who the sides are. So even if they're not the best sources, like if it's Wikipedia or just random, there's think tanks on like the right and the left who, or like advocacy groups who are made up of people who aren't experts. They're just people who like feel really strongly about a topic. They write great stuff because usually it gets to the core of what the controversy is about from their opinion, and they're usually citing or making reference to people either on their own side or on the other side who are mainstream people. So those are great sources to sort of like get a vibe check of what's going on in this debate and also follow up with like who are the main people in this controversy. Um, by the end of this process, you should have you should basically have a glossary of terms of keywords that are going to be part of the debate, key authors, and then maybe some articles that people seem to be talking about a lot. So for example, for the high school national topic next year, for our novice packet, we're doing something about basically the New York Times versus the OpenAI case that's currently happening right now. So in researching about like what are the big controversies in intellectual property and where we wanted to go was AI. What we found pretty quickly was that's a really big case that a lot of people are talking about. So we figured, well, if a bunch of people are talking about it and they're talking about it in news articles and accessible language, that's probably a pretty good place to choose our novice packet F because we know there's going to be a bunch of evidence at least talking about it. And a lot of it's going to be in sources that should be more or less accessible to students, right? So as we go through that research process, we sort of went from a large idea of like, well, it's going to be something about intellectual property and maybe AI down to like, okay, this is the case we actually mostly want to talk about. And here's how that's going to impact the debate. And we could always backtrack on that and choose other cases or do whatever, right? But we at least know approximately what area we're researching here. And then once you get to that, you can choose your subtopics, right? Okay, so remember we talked about this diagram before of basically in the debate in the evidence packet, we want to structure the argument in a particular way so that it sort of ends up looking like this. Like you have the affirmative and it's sort of general story, like, hey, we should pass this law to stop AI from stealing from the New York Times, or we should pass a law to protect the Amazon, whatever, right? And then you get your actual subtopics and advantages. Phase one is just figuring out those two pieces. So you don't, beyond this point, you don't have to figure out like, well, what's the uniqueness going to say? What pieces of evidence am I going to use for uniqueness? What's the data for that unique, that none of that matters right now, right? We're just trying to figure out like, what is the big story of the affirmative and negative? And then what are the subtopics that sort of support that story or tell that story? Okay, that gets you into phase two. Phase two is research into the actual specific subtopics. So once you figured out the key controversies and subtopics, you can actually go start compiling what is going to become the evidence that you use. So in general, you pretty much want to cut anything and everything that seems relevant. So even if it's not a super strong card or the source isn't really great or whatever, just cut it real quick. And I recommend just create a tag, put the URL in, and then put the text of the evidence in. You don't have to underline it or highlight it or whatever. Just put the raw text in there. Once we get to the editing phase in probably the end of this phase two or beginning of phase three, we'll actually start creating the citations and underlining it. But at this point, you're going to pull up like probably 40 or 50 cards to be part of these subtopics, and you're only going to choose 3 to 5, right? So why make citations and underline 45 cards that you're not even going to use at the end of the day? You don't need to, right? So just try to find, I would say try to find a few key pieces of evidence that establish the divide between the two sides on each subtopic. So you have like your really good evidence for the affirmative and your really good evidence for the negative, and you know these two are in contention with each other, right? That's the core of your subtopic. The other 4 or 5 cards you choose just provide more context or more arguments or more choices to follow on with that. But if you're thinking about this in debate terms, this is kind of like your 1AC, 1NC evidence, like your best evidence that you can just get through the whole debate on these two pieces of evidence. The other evidence is just there for backup in case you need more arguments, right? And then once you've found that sort of key evidence for both sides and generated about 30 or 50 cards for each side for each subtopic on both sides, then we can start making choices about like, okay, these fit, these don't fit. Here's what we want to do with it, right? Okay. So again, this the second phase is more talking about the latter half of this this model, this example, this structure. So once we get into the subtopics, we sort of know what the pieces of evidence we want are, or sorry, what the structural pieces are, and then what pieces of evidence support that, and then we sort of figure out, okay, what data exists in these evidences to actually support that, right? So phase two is sort of fleshing out and building out the skeleton that we've created. And for different types of debate, this is going to look a little different. So for example, in EA, we don't use uniqueness, solvency, and impact, right? Actually, in Debate en Español and FL, we don't do that either. So we're pretty much going to move straight from the subtopic into the evidence itself. So we're going to skip this whole phase right here. Okay, phase three is just research to fill gaps. This one's pretty easy. Sometimes you just end up not having the card you're looking for, and you just got to go find it, right? So in this case, we're probably going to be looking for something that gives the kids more options to make the argument they want to make. So let's say the argument we're trying to make is a uniqueness argument about economic growth, right? We're trying to say economic growth will be, US economic growth will be below 2% over the next 10 years. Okay. If we're trying to choose 3 or 5 cards, those 3 or 5 cards have to have different reasons about why that would be the case. So if all 5 cards just say like, hey, I'm Ben Bernanke, I'm the Fed chair, and I think growth will be below 2%. Well, you might have 5 cards that say that, but if they all say the same thing, you really only have one card, right? They're just one card that says the same thing 5 times. So when we choose the different cards, they should say the same general thing, like US growth should be below 2%, but they should have different reasons why. So card one might say, okay, Ben Bernanke says so, and he's a guy who would know. And then card two might say, well, it'll be below 2% because US education levels are falling. And then card three might say productivity is falling because there's not innovation or like whatever, right? So we'll get different options for the kids to figure out what they want to say. And like we talked about before, that first card, the primary card, is usually our best card, and then the other cards that follow on from that just sort of fill it out, give more context, more evidence. So I want to pause quick, and I want you to open up that middle school evidence packet that we talked about, the one that is in the file from the last training, I believe. In there, the first few pages are of the rookie case arguments are the Mars topic and the advantages about Mars colonization. And I want you to look at the first three pieces of uniqueness that are in there. Okay. I'm going to pause sharing so I can go find this real quick and give you a direct link just in case you don't have it. Okay. Yep. It is exactly where I thought it was. Okay. So in that file I just shared in the chat, you want the files called MSNT Mars Affirmative File Rookie 2024, 2025.
I'm sorry, which cards are we looking at in that file?
You want to open the file called MSNT Mars Affirmative File Rookie
Mhm.
and the evidence that says uniqueness at the top. So it should be pages 3, 5, and 7.
Thank you.
You'll notice the formatting in this is weird. It's creating page breaks. When we talk about editing, we'll talk about why that is. So I'm going to resume sharing so that the crowd can see it. I'll give you about one more minute. Okay, so let's check in. Some context I probably should provide. I thought it was in the file, but it's not. So the plan text here is basically the US government should give NASA money to colonize Mars, right? So if our first advantage is colonizing Mars would be really swag and cool, the uniqueness just tells us that Mars colonization is not going to happen right now if we don't pass the plan, right? So these three pieces of evidence, how do they help demonstrate the principle that kids have to have different choices, different meaningful choices about what what argument the evidence allows them to make?
They're all like different actors, like explaining why these different actors are not going to be colonizing Mars in the present. So it's like you've got domestic, foreign, then private.
Yep. So imagine yourself from the negatives perspective. What, how does this help you make your argument as the negative?
Like, how would we respond as the negative?
If you were the negative, what strategy options does this give you to have these three choices?
Oh, like you could try and attack each of them individually. So you could say like, no, SpaceX is gonna go do it, or you could say like the US, or you could say like X
Mhm.
other country.
Yep. So most affirmative teams, they'll just say something like, they'll probably use the first card, which just says NASA doesn't have the money to do this. Hey, plan text gives them the money, so we're gonna do this thing, right? Negative can come back and be like, yeah, that's true. NASA doesn't have the money, but China is gonna go colonize Mars, or SpaceX, Elon, whatever, is gonna go colonize Mars. So it gives them the opportunity to short circuit the affirmative's arguments by choosing one of the other pieces of evidence, right? I'm not sure that we're going to get as clear of a distinction in your arguments as we can get here, right? Like, there's a lot written about Mars colonization and who can or can't do it or whatever, which allows us, the research allows us to make these choices in the packet. But this is kind of the gold standard of different evidence choices. And I can tell you, uh, when we were researching this packet, there's a lot of like NASA doesn't have the money to do this, and there's a lot of like Elon Musk and his companies cannot do this for various reasons. There isn't really a lot of like non-US countries aren't going to do this. So this is one of those places where getting to the end of phase two, I was like, well, I think we have the right subtopics and we have good evidence, but I need to go get one more choice to put in here. I don't want another card that just says NASA doesn't have the money or Elon doesn't have the money, right? I want some other choice. So I had to go into phase three to go find this card, right? And that's probably what's going to happen to you at some point here. So that's what research to fill the gaps looks like. Okay, I want to make a big note to you. I know when people think of these types of projects or other research projects you've done, it usually feels like a linear process. Like you start at point A and then you move B to C to D until you get to the end process. Evidence packet creation isn't really like that. You're mostly moving forward most of the time, like you're getting your resources, materials, your subtopics, your evidence, but sometimes you just hit a snag or you thought some area of research existed and it just doesn't exist. Like we all have biases or knowledge that we bring to this evidence creation process, and sometimes that doesn't map onto like what actually exists out in the world, right? So don't get discouraged. If you're like, I thought I had a good idea, I thought this would work out, it's not working. Hey, that's normal. Happens to the best of us. All right. Okay. Any questions about the goals of what 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 the research goals look like and kind of what the phases are going to look like for you? All right. So we're going to talk about research methods quick. And this PowerPoint is saved in the drive for you. I'm not expecting you're going to know all this by just by talking about it for 15 minutes today. So go back and look at these and use some of them as we go through the actual research. So first quick note, talking about Google versus Google Scholar, kind of talked about this already, but Google is really good for getting background information, um, hearing informal arguments like opinion pieces in the newspaper or whatever, finding advocates, people who are probably writing about this a lot and who maybe are academics who are writing more accessible articles, and just for general arguments that cover a lot of ground. So if you want someone to say like, hey, I don't think we can go to Mars because there's not enough money and science reasons and political reasons and kind of like whatever, all this stuff. You can find that on Google. Google's a great place to find those kinds of arguments. Google Scholar is much better for finding specific arguments. So if you're looking for someone to say, hey, we're never going to reach Mars because the magnetosphere of Mars is too weak and it's going to let UV radiation in. And for all these scientific reasons, we cannot colonize Mars because of the magnetosphere, right? Like very, very narrow, specific question of what we're talking about in terms of Mars colonization. That's a good place where Google Scholar can help you. Obviously, the better sources are largely going to be in Google Scholar, and Google Scholar has a bunch of citations, both in the papers themselves and people who cited the articles you're looking at. So it gives you a broad range of places to follow up. It'll also have the latest information in that specific field. So if you set the time to look at like, past 3 months, find me a Mars colonization article in the past 3 months. That's going to be the most up to date science on what researchers actually think today, right? So Google versus Google Scholar, they are both good, but they are good for different purposes. Make sure you're using them for the right tool for the right purpose, right? Go back to the sculptor metaphor. The Google is kind of like the hammer and chisel. You're just knocking off big pieces to get it into the general form you want, right? Google Scholar is more like sanding it down, refining it, making it look nice, and getting those little edges figured out, right? You don't want to use a hammer and chisel to make those little fine, minute details. You want to use Google Scholar for something like that. Okay, Google search tools. At the very minimum, I want you to be able to do these 3 things when you're researching. If you do these 3 things, you will save so much time researching. If you don't do these 3 things, you're going to waste your time horrifically, and you're going to create bad materials for yourself to work with. So again, you don't have to memorize these today. We'll have time to practice them, but this is important. So one is the time and date restrictions in Google. Second is using Boolean search operations. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, we'll talk about it. And then third is using citation tracking as a method. So this is just regular Google. This is what it looks like in regular Google to use time restrictions. So if you punch in something, just some search term into Google, like I put climate change science, it'll give you all of the results in here. Before you even look at anything, don't even tempt yourself. Do not even start reading what comes up on the page, okay? Before you read anything, you must click this tools button and then go to the drop-down column that says time and limit it to a certain time for what you're looking at. Some things you want to be really up to date. So if we're looking for a question of like, how much is the government giving to NASA right now? What's NASA's total budget right now? We probably want to limit it to the last year, right? Like we need this year's fiscal amount that NASA is getting. If we're looking for a card that's like capitalism is bad or capitalism is good, you probably want something relatively recent, right? Like you don't want something from 1896. Capitalism has changed something since then, but it doesn't need to be from the last year, right? It's like maybe within the last 10 years, something about like, hey, capitalism, it's bad, caused the 2007 financial collapse or whatever, right? Like, okay, that's important. But for most of what you're looking for, probably looking for like a 3-year range is best. Some of the questions you get into, maybe we could have a longer range, but 3 years is probably about right. In Google Scholar, it's even easier to do. So this is the Google Scholar search page. It automatically brings up time limitations on here. So you can set it to 2021, or you can do a custom range, whatever makes sense for the research question you're trying to figure out, right? Okay. Boolean search operations. Very important. So Boolean search operations are just grammar that you use to plug into the search bar to get specific results. So you can think of these sort of like a math equation. putting question, phrasing your research queries in Google in a particular way will give you different outcomes in what you see, right? So our goal is to use the correct search terms to narrow down the amount of results you get to basically just what you're looking for and exclude all that other stuff that is not important, right? So we'll talk a few ways of using this. So the really simple ones are using search operations that help connect some words. So if you type two concepts into Google, so let's say like the terms climate change and science, right? If you want your Google result to have both of those terms in it, you would put a capitalized and between them. And that means that all the search terms must be present in the results. So if you ever Google search like a pretty long query, like if you're looking for like how has climate change affected Brazil and Argentina over the last 5 years? Google will be like, I found these articles from like 10 years ago. They include Brazil, but not Argentina. That seems pretty close, right, David? You have to be like, no, Google, that's not close. I need you to find these specific terms. Boolean search operators are how you keep Google in line to give you exactly what you want. If you've done your research, you will know exactly what you want, right? So using these search operators, we'll find out either it exists or it doesn't exist, but we're not going to have to wade through 1,000 articles that like kind of talk about it, right? Another search operator is great, is or, using or. So again, you have to capitalize it, but assuming you want two different phrases that mean functionally the same thing, or you're not sure if the evidence will use one or both of them, you can use the or connector to say like, okay, I know it'll have this or this. I need it to say one of those. So you might say two terms like climate change and global warming. It's possible that academics, articles, whatever, could be using either of those, but possibly not both of them. But all the articles that have either one of them, we want the results that have them, right? So we would use or. This is the most important one, not. So you can type in not, or you can use the negative, the minus search term. Sometimes you'll find like there's search terms that include a bunch of stuff that you don't want. So sometimes it will be people's names, or it'll be specific events or areas. Like you might find out, like, let's say we're researching the Amazon, right? And we're like, we want to know, how does the Amazon contribute to climate change? And you keep getting all these articles about Amazon, the company, or Jeff Bezos, right? Okay, that's when you would definitely want to use the not function. So we would be like climate change science, Amazon rainforest, not Bezos, not Amazon company or whatever, so that we can delimit all those things that we don't want from the search terms. For those of you who are visual learners, this is just a couple of Venn diagrams to help show. So if you're using and, you search puppy and kitten, get and, you'll get all the articles that include both puppies and kittens. If you're using or, you would get articles that include puppies or kittens and both of them. And if you're using not, you could say, I'm looking for articles about puppies, but not kittens. Hate kittens. This will give you all the articles that contain puppy, but if they contain puppy and kitten, you will not get them, and you'll not get strictly kitten articles, right? Okay, these are also super important. I don't think I would be able to do my research if I didn't have these tools, or at least it would take me like 10 times longer, right? So using the brackets will help prioritize Google in what to figure out. So if you have a search term, like let's say 10 words searched in Google, it doesn't necessarily know what's more important or less important in those 10 words. But if you put brackets around the thing that is the most important, it will prioritize those in the results it gives you. So for example, when we had the NATO topic, we asked Google about all types of NATO related things like NATO climate change, NATO cybersecurity, NATO internal relations, foreign relations, whatever. we didn't want articles about foreign relations that NATO was part of. We wanted articles about NATO's foreign relations, which are two different things and hard for Google to grasp the difference of. So you put NATO in those terms and knows, okay, NATO is the important thing. So if I have two search results, one that mentions NATO once and one that mentions them 70 times, the one that mentions them 70 times is probably the more important one, right? So Google will should figure out that that's the most important one, right? And then this one is the most important search tool other than the time limiting, which is putting things in quotes. When you're doing your research, there will be specific phrases or terms that you will need to find in your evidence. Sometimes in the high school topic, these are terms of art like security cooperation. You don't want security and cooperation. You want the very specific thing, security cooperation, right? So putting those two words in quotes will give you articles that talk about security cooperation, not security and cooperation, but the very specific thing of security cooperation. So if we end up looking for, in Sophie's case for EA, like culturally relevant schools, and then another term like East African students. Those are two terms that we would want to throw into their own set of quotes so that Google Scholar knows, Google and Google Scholar know that we're not looking for culturally specific schools generally, and we're not looking for East African or East African students generally. We're looking for culturally specific schooling and East African students. So you could imagine all the result terms you could get just from those 6 words suddenly become narrowed down to this very specific group of students and schools and their combination with each other in that research, right? So once you finish phase 1 and you have the key terms and key authors, that's when you can start using some of these tools. So this is just a search operator and commands that has kind of a list of what these look like. Yeah, you can also Google Boolean search operators into Google, and it'll show you a bunch of other things I didn't cover, which could be helpful for you. The last thing I want to talk about is citation tracking. So in your research, you might notice that there's a particular author or article that a lot of people are citing. It's probably a good idea to go track down that original article and see what it says for background research. Could be an older article, could be not as super relevant anymore, but as long as it's getting cited a lot in the literature, you probably want to go read it and figure out like, this is the keystone argument of what everyone's talking about. I need to go read this and understand it, right? You can also do this in reverse. You can find an article you like and see who has cited it in Google Scholar. So this next, yeah, here we go. So this is what it looks like in Google Scholar. If you punch your search term in, gives you all these articles, right? Usually Google Scholar will sort by what it thinks is the most important in the academic literature base, and it will show you who has cited these actual articles, right? So if you find a really good article and you're like, dang, this is really good. It's a little bit older, but I really like this article. Go see who it's cited by, and read what those papers are called. The odds are, if it's a good article and cited by 10 or more people, there's going to be something in those citations that's going to help you make the research, make the arguments that you're looking for, right? You can also check the citations in the evidence you like. There might be good sources in there. So when people are writing their papers, they include the citations at the bottom, right? If you're cutting evidence from, let's say, pages 2 to 4, and there's 3 citations in there, once you're done cutting that evidence, probably go look up those citations and just see what they say. It doesn't always lead you anywhere important, but sometimes the article you thought was good is citing an article that's even better, and you're just like, oh, well, the original is even better. I don't need this like knockoff copy, right? So I would say go, especially in articles where they're like general, like, hey, these 2 sides say this. Here's some citations about the main authors for both sides. That's going to give you some really good citations that you can follow up. You can also use Google Scholar's related articles function. So again, you can look at the citations, and I recommend doing that, who cited this article. But if you look up the related articles, this is what Google takes to be the relevant related articles. I can tell you it's pretty hit or miss. I don't know what the algorithm is here that makes the related articles. Sometimes they're super helpful. Sometimes it's like, yeah, this is literally a different topic. I don't know what this is talking about. So take this with a grain of salt. But it can be helpful. And then most importantly, in all of this, save time. Okay. Use shortcuts for reading that help you save time. When you're doing your research, there's basically an unlimited number of articles that you could read about this topic to learn more, but you're going to hit diminishing results very quickly. After that first phase, you're going to have a really good understanding of what this topic is about. You don't need to read more articles that are just general glossaries on what's going on, right? You need your actual specific evidence. So as you get through the phases, here's what I recommend in each phase. In phase 1, you should always be limiting your search results by time. So probably last 3 or 4 years, and then just make note of the keywords that appear in doing that. And then in phase 2, use the keywords in Boolean searches. So once you know what those subtopics are and what you're looking for and the actual, the terms of art that are used in the research, use those to actually create results. And then once you create those results, you're going to get a lot of academic articles or very hyper-specific articles that have a lot of context to them. Do not read the full article, okay? You waste a ton of time trying to read all these articles. You don't need to do that. The context they're giving you is mostly stuff you know already. So just skim the articles, try to find the area that is of most use to you, and use the find function on your keyboard to look for those specific words and phrases that you put in. So if you put in something like let's say you're trying to find the US GDP below 2% over the next 10 years, right? You would control F 2% or 10 years or decade, something like that, to find where in this 40-page article are they actually talking about the US GDP growth over the next 10 years? Because that's what you're looking for, right? If you get stuck, if you're using Boolean search terms and it's not really returning the results you think it should, you probably made a mistake in phase 1. You probably don't have the right key search terms, or you're looking for something that doesn't have a big literature base on it. Before you go back to phase 1, I would recommend just take out those Boolean search terms and just put in the raw search terms and see what happens. Look at the first 10 articles. If they seem right to what you're looking for, then they probably have better search terms in them. But if they're wrong to what you're looking for, you're probably on a wild goose chase, right? You're looking for something that doesn't exist. Once you get to phase 3 of filling in the gaps, you can use extremely narrow keywords for Boolean searches and use the find function to find those actual things. So again, if it doesn't return results, just move on to the next source. And then very importantly, especially once you hit Google Scholar, if you start to hit a paywall where it's like, I'll show you the first page, but you have to pay or you need institutional access to see the rest of this, don't bother. Save the URL somewhere. Maybe we'll come back to this article if we really need it. Like this is the one article that talks about this one thing. We can figure it out at that point. But none of the topics we're researching are so specific that I think we're going to need to do any of that, right? Anything that article says is probably said somewhere else in a more accessible way. So let's not waste our time trying to find this specific article. Let's just move on, save it for later just in case, but let's move on to something that's easier. Okay. Again, those methods, maybe you've used some before, maybe you haven't used them, different contexts. I don't expect you to be proficient in them right now, but we're going to have the rest of your internship to work on them and learn how to use them in the appropriate context. So before we get on to the outcomes, which will be super quick, any questions about those methods? Okay, have any of you used Boolean search operators before? Okay, great, good. Okay, so what we're looking for in outcomes, very simple. Phase 1 and 2 probably take you about 1 to 2 weeks. I just want you to create a Google Doc to keep track of the major items. So key authors, sources, terms, all that good stuff. Phase 2. This is when we're actually going to create the Microsoft Word document with verbatim to build the actual file. So we're going to create the argument structure, the argument skeleton, and then start filling in that skeleton with a bunch of cards to sort of flesh it out, right? Once we get through that sort of bloat expansion phase, we're going to sort of whittle down all of those cards into the 3 to 5 per subtopic per side that we want. Once we finish that, we might realize, well, you know, we need 1 or 2 cards to figure out the balance. Like we have this nice AF card that says this thing, but we need a neg response, something like that. So get into phase 3. Phase 3 should take us probably only 1 week if we did our job right, but could take up to 3 weeks if we end up choosing some pretty hard subtopics. And then in phase 3, we're going to use verbatim to make some formatting adjustments to make the files printable and presentable and accessible in the formatting ways that we talked about last time, right? I believe that's the end. This is the end. Yes. Okay. Okay. So any questions about any of these research methods? What you're going to be doing probably over the next week here in terms of phase 1, and then maybe Monday, not Monday of next week, but the week after, the 24th. Maybe we can have a training about like using verbatim and Microsoft to do the actual editing functions that we're going to start to do in phase 2, right? So no questions about that. We're not there yet, but just phase 1, beginning of phase 2. Any questions of this part of the research project?
So you said that we have to look over about 100 articles for phase 1.
That's my recommendation. If you're more efficient, you could do fewer, right? Like if you read 20 and you feel like you know all the search terms and you punch them into the Boolean operators and they actually spit out what you're expecting them to spit out and it's all relevant. You know, I've made packets. I've moved into phase 2 reading as few as 30 articles. It's not a good idea though. So I would say read about 100. And I'm not saying Google Scholar articles. I'm just saying like web page results that just say general stuff. And I'm not even saying the full web page, just the parts that are relevant to whatever you're talking about. So that might be 1 paragraph per source. It might be a couple pages per source. It's kind of up to you, right? Like yesterday I downloaded a book that's like 400 pages about colonizing Mars. That doesn't count as 1 towards my 100. That counts as like a bunch towards the 100. And I'm not even going to read the full thing, right? So don't wear yourself out in phase 1 trying to read too much. You're going to get a sense of when you get to the point of understanding. And the point of understanding is once you start seeing articles that where you're like, I swear I've read this before in other words, in other language, in other places. It's like, yeah, that you're pretty much hitting diminishing returns, right? Maybe try some different search terms to see if you can find different stuff. But I would say at about the 50 articles threshold, you're going to start seeing a lot of repeats where you're like, okay, I need to either try different search terms and find different stuff about this topic, or I've pretty much maxed out the general research that I need, and I need to move into phase 2. But 100 articles is good. Nice round number. Yeah, any other questions? I will tell you right off the bat, there's a strong correlation between the quality of phase 1 and the quality of the final product. When I said, you know, I started doing this 8 years ago, I came in with a debater's mind thinking, well, I know a lot about these arguments and these topics, and I know where they're going to end up. I was wrong most of the time. Or I ended up creating more work for myself to match the model of what I thought the research was going to be about. So just go in with an open mind, you know, don't feel like you're above reading background sources or news articles or whatever. Everything is relevant in this phase. Just learning. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, great stuff.